voice is essentially a wind instrument where the breath does all of the heavy lifting. So it's really important to remember that the work of singing happens with those same muscles of respiration that we already talked about and a little bit extra. In this video, I'll be talking about how you can use what you've already learned and a little bit extra to support a beautiful singing sound. Breath support body parts and concepts. The diaphragm and intercostals. You might recognize the diaphragm and intercostals from the breathing video, and that's because they are muscles of inspiration, of inhalation. You might remember that the diaphragm goes down and widens in circumference to expand your lungs, and the rib cage, lifted by the intercostals, move out and up 360 degrees all the way around your body to create more space as well. Both of those muscles are extremely important in breath support. Singing is basically a fancy form of exhalation. So once your muscles of inhalation have gone into the active position in order to inflate your lungs, to support the air, they have to stay relatively active. I call this fighting the collapse. So the diaphragm stays down, the intercostals, the rib cage stays out and up instead of immediately relaxing and going back to that deflated exhalation position. When you think about this, it might help to kind of think about your lungs as a pair of muscular balloons. In order to inflate them, those muscles go into the active position, and then they can stay there even though the mouth of the balloon is open to keep the air inside the balloon for longer. I talked about this a little bit when I talked about abducting your vocal folds and holding your breath in the onset section. That's exactly what we were doing, was keeping those muscles of inhalation in the active position in order to hold the breath in the lungs even when the throat is open. There are quite a few advantages to keeping your diaphragm and your intercostals active when you sing. You are conserving your air and not allowing it to all whoosh out, which means that you can sing longer phrases. You can often sing with more volume and more tone, more vocal presence. If you fail to do this and you allow your diaphragm and your intercostals to go back to that resting position, you're going to have shorter phrases with a breathier, kind of more limp, wimpier tone. Breath pressure. The reason I called this section breath support body parts and concepts instead of just body parts is because of this specific section that I want to talk about right now. Breath pressure is all about the air that you have inhaled using your diaphragm and your intercostals. That air is inside of your body at that point. When you breathe in, your vocal folds are abducted, and so the breath is connected to the outside. But as soon as you start singing, your vocal cords adduct, they come together, and the breath in your lungs is cut off from the breath from the outside. Then we can get increased or decreased pressure inside of the body as opposed to the air on the outside. And that's where this concept of breath pressure comes in. Breath support and breath pressure are sometimes used interchangeably. When you're using your muscles of breath support, a big part of what you're doing is changing the amount of breath pressure that you're using to sing. Having an appropriate amount of breath pressure allows you to have the volume, the tone, and the consistency that you want. If you have too much breath pressure, it's a health risk. You can end up pushing too hard on your vocal folds, putting extra pressure on them, and you can even hurt yourself, as well as kind of have a strident, unpleasant tone. If you don't have enough breath pressure, you can end up with, again, that kind of breathy, limp sound that's not going to carry very well, not give you very much bang for your buck. Breath pressure affects everything about singing, from the efficiency of your sound to the tone and timbre, and a huge part of that is regulated by your abdominal muscles. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. Abdominal muscles. I already mentioned that your 8-pack abs have to be relaxed when you breathe in, so your abdomen is nice and soft and able to expand. Well, when you are singing, especially when you are starting to run out of air, your abdominal muscles can engage to help you to get enough breath pressure to finish the phrase. Your transverse abs are especially important in this process. The transverse abs are located underneath your rectus abdominis, your 8-pack abs, and they kind of scoop in and up. If you've ever tried to suck it in and look like you're thinner than you actually are, you're using those transverse abs. And the transverse abs can help you to get that little last bit of air out. While the abdominal muscles, and especially the transverse abs, are important for breath support, I would argue that they are not as important as your muscles of inhalation, so the diaphragm in the intercostals. If you don't keep those in an active position for long enough, there's only so much that your abs can do to take over. So as you're first learning about breath support, really try to focus more on staying inflated, on fighting the collapse, as opposed to squeezing everything out. Factors that affect breath support. A lot of these factors are the same factors that affect your vocal onset. You've got range, register, and volume. You'll probably recognize some of these concepts from the onset section. Having a longer, more closed mouth to the vocal tract makes it easier to have good breath support because of that back pressure. Again, think about that coffee straw versus that boba straw. It's easier to blow through the coffee straw for longer because the opening is smaller, because the vocal tract is longer than that big fat boba straw with the bigger hole. When you're learning about breath support, sticking to more closed sounds at first in a comfortable range and register for you is a good idea. As you gain skills, you can start to venture to more open sounds and outside of your comfortable range and register. I would highly recommend that when you start to do that, you incorporate some of the advice from the dead zone section of this course so you can do so healthfully and comfortably. General breath support exercises. A couple of concepts about general breath support before we get into the nitty-gritty here. One big thing to keep in mind is that all the muscles above your diaphragm, other than very small changes that have to occur in your face to form different words, etc., should pretty much be neutral. So really focus on working down instead of up. And the next section of this course will really help you with that as well. I also highly recommend incorporating that meditative singing. So lying on the floor, thinking about really relaxing your body as you practice breath support, because it's going to help you to connect with what you've already been doing, connect your learning, and to have a really nice loose baseline, especially from the diaphragm up. Unvoiced breath support exercise, the hiss. As you know, a big part of this course is finding ways to incorporate learning how to sing into your day. And the hiss is perfect for that because it is unvoiced. It doesn't require any phonation or actual voice. The goal of this exercise is basically to get used to fighting the collapse and extending that breath for longer. To do this exercise, set a timer for about 15 seconds. Or skip the timer entirely if you're doing other things and focus on just going as long as you can. Take a good low breath, engaging your diaphragm and your intercostals, and then making sure that everything above the diaphragm is relaxed. Start a hiss. Like that. Go for as long as you can, experimenting with that feeling of fighting the collapse, that feeling of fullness, almost like a beach ball that you get when you are holding those muscles in place. And try and get longer and longer. If you're using a timer, you can aim for, if at first you've got 15 seconds, aim for 20. If you're at 20 seconds at first, aim for 30. A lot of professional singers can go for over a minute. So keep focusing on staying expanded, fighting the collapse. And then once you're running out of breath, you can start to engage those abs to increase the breath pressure and get the little last bit out. That whole time, really try to make sure that you're as relaxed as possible in the parts of the body that aren't involved in supporting your sound. Short to long vocal tract exercises. Like I mentioned, it's easier to sing from a technical perspective through a long vocal tract. So going from the longest vocal tract possible to the shortest vocal tract possible is a good idea as you strengthen your breath support skills. The longest possible vocal tract actually comes with the aid of a coffee straw. So you can steal a coffee straw from a coffee shop, or you can order one if you want. You want an opening that's about 3 millimeters wide, so you get some good breath pressure as you're singing through that. It's going to feel very occluded. After the coffee straw, a hum is the next longest vocal tract you can get, where you're singing through your nostrils. Then we have lip and tongue trills. A lip trill looks like this and can be unvoiced or voiced. Tongue trills are pretty much the same motion, but using your tongue. For both of those, notice that my air is moving my lips or my tongue rather than my tongue or my lips muscularly moving. If you have trouble getting these trills at first, you can try using a lot of air, as if you're blowing a raspberry, or you're a horse, just to get things going. Once you get better at this, you can reduce the amount of airflow for a more controlled sound that you can hold for longer. The most closed vowels are oo and e. So those are next on the list, after which we have o and e, and then finally the most open vowel, ah. You can use any of these sounds on different patterns. Here are a couple that I recommend and that I will include some warm-up videos for. Sirens, you don't need a warm-up video for because these are just sounds. I was kind of demonstrating them with those lip trills. You can go wider, so you're covering more of your range and multiple registers. For example. Then we have 3-note scales, do, re, mi, re, do. Do, re, mi, re, do. So for example, if you're doing that on oo, ooh. You can do 5-note scales, do, re, mi, fa, so, fa, mi, re, do. Ah. Or finally, you can do fifths. So for example, ooh. As you're doing all of those, really focus on keeping your diaphragm and your intercostals engaged. And then if it goes for long enough that you're almost out of air, you can start to engage your abs to get rid of that little last bit of air. One thing to keep in mind here that I mentioned in the breathing video is that you don't need to take in more air than you want to use. If you want to practice singing and supporting long phrases, you can do these exercises more slowly, or you can not breathe in between key changes of the exercise until you're out of breath. Fight the collapse concept. When you're thinking about fighting the collapse, first take a really good breath so you feel extremely inflated. And then as you sing or hiss or do whatever, try to maintain that full feeling. One image that I often use for this is the girl Violet Beauregard, who turns into a blueberry in Willy Wonka. I often tell students that I sort of feel like a blueberry when I am singing because I am staying so inflated so I can support those long phrases. So try to cultivate that kind of a feeling, keeping in mind that from here up, you really want to be nice and loose. For the diaphragm, you can use a hand on your belly to remind yourself not to collapse. This also helps because you can feel yourself start to collapse and make sure that you stop. You can do this with your rib cage as well with those intercostals by putting a hand on your rib cage and making sure that that rib cage stays in that expanded out and up position as you sing or hiss. Abdominal muscles. You can either overuse or underuse your abdominal muscles when you're supporting your sound. If you tend to squeeze the crap out of your abs and really push all your air out too early, make sure that your abs are relaxed as you breathe in by pushing gently right underneath where your rib cage ends as you inhale. And then as you sing, try to maintain that bouncy feeling for as long as possible. If your tendency is to undersupport and underuse your abs, first and foremost, make sure that you are fighting the collapse, keeping the intercostals and the diaphragm engaged for as long as possible as you hold a phrase. Once those are starting to come in and give out, even though you're trying not to, you can start to purposefully engage your abs and scoop in and up with your transverse abdominis in order to get the little last bit of breath out. You've probably noticed more and more, I just can't avoid talking about the importance of staying loose and relaxed in much of your body as you sing. There are some muscles that you specifically have to engage, like your diaphragm and your intercostals and sometimes your abs, but there are a whole lot of muscles that you want to purposefully relax. We're finally going to dig into that in the next video.